Leaders don't rush because they're careless. They rush because speed feels like safety. But here's the truth, and I want to offer this with precision. Speed isn't efficiency, it's a physiological response to pressure. It feels productive, it looks committed, it signals competence. But reaching fast is not the same as responding well. And moving quickly is not the same as moving effectively. Speed feels like control. Speed feels like relevance. Speed feels like relief. And now with technology accelerating, everything around you, the pace, the expectations, the volume, speed can feel even more necessary. But acceleration isn't leadership, and speed without rhythm is just reactivity. And that's why it's so seductive and why it's so costly. Welcome back to the Leadership Longevity Podcast. I'm Elizabeth Hughes, and we're here continuing Survival Driver 2, the influence distortion pattern. So myth 5 was the myth of gripping. Myth 6 is the myth of rushing, the belief that reacting fast equals being effective. And here's the part that matters. This survivor driver distorts your influence, not by draining your energy, but by accelerating your pace beyond your capacity to think clearly. So when the external layer of your ecosystem becomes unstable, in this case, the relationships, expectations, pace, pressure, and conditions around you, your leadership begins to distort in predictable ways. You grip, you rush, you rely on authority instead of presence. Speed is one of the most seductive distortions because it feels like competence. As we'll explore today, speed isn't efficiency. It's a nervous system response to pressure in an environment that now moves at machine pace. Your leadership cannot and should not try to match it. Let's get into it then. So inside the leadership longevity ecosystem, this myth sits within Survival Driver 2, the distortion pattern. And where speed is a distortion of influence, the belief that urgency equals importance and that fast decisions are decisive decisions. And here's the part that matters. So speed fractures your external layer, replacing clarity with urgency and collapsing influence into reactivity. Because when the environment accelerates faster than your nervous system can regulate, you lose your rhythm. And without rhythm, you lose range. And in the external layer, your pace becomes contagious. Teams inherit the speed of the leaders. Rushing doesn't shape your influence, it shapes the conditions others must work inside. So the myth of speed tells you that urgency equals importance. Fast decisions are decisive decisions, slowing down is falling behind. Responsiveness is leadership pace, and where pace is a proxy for competence. But here's a deeper truth. Speed is often a nervous system response, not a strategic one. Sometimes it's not leadership, it's adrenaline. And before we go further, I want to honor something important. Many leaders absolutely value their speed. They value their responsiveness and they see it as part of their integrity, part of how they show they care, confidence and commitment. And they're right. Speed can be a strength. Responsiveness can be a form of leadership, but only when it's chosen. The myth isn't that speed exists. The myth is the belief that speed equals effectiveness and that moving fast is the same as moving well and that reacting quickly is the same as leading wisely. Speed becomes a problem only when the ecosystem starts driving it instead of you. So here's what it feels like. You're moving quickly, you're responding immediately, you're staying across everything. And part of you is proud of that because speed has always been one of your strengths. It's how you've signaled reliability, care, and competence. But underneath, your thinking is shallow. Your creativity is thin. Your presence is fractured and your influence is diluted. You're busy, but not effective. You're fast, but not forward. You're responsive, but not resonant. And the hardest part, everyone around you is rushing as well. So it actually feels normal. It feels expected. It feels like the only way to survive. Because in most systems, the pace isn't chosen, it's inherited. And inherited pace becomes the culture. And now, with AI compressing timelines and accelerating expectations, the environment moves in faster, not because humans became faster, but because the conditions did. This is where the myth tightens its grip. Because the faster the environment moves, the more you feel you should move with it. But deep down, you can actually feel the cost. Not because speed is wrong, but because it's no longer you choosing the pace. The ecosystem is choosing it for you. So the myth is seductive because speed feels like competence, commitment, control, contribution, and relevance. And organizations reward it. Thanks for the quick turnaround. We need this ASAP. You can jump on a call. Let's move fast. Speed becomes a badge of honor, a performance of leadership. But here's the quiet truth. Speed is often the performance of leadership, but not the practice of it. So let's talk about the organization of perpetual motion. So there's a leadership team. You've met versions of them before who are technically working on the same strategy, but living in completely different conditions. One leader has just stepped into a new role. She's finding her rhythm, new relationships, new expectations, new cognitive load. Another is covering two portfolios after a sudden resignation. His calendar is stacked, his sleep is thin, and every request feels urgent. The third is preparing for a restructure that hasn't been announced yet. She's carrying the emotional weight of uncertainty, the kind that makes you cautious, careful, reactive. The fourth team member is managing a team stretched thin by vacancies and rising demand. She's navigating interpersonal tensions, onboarding gaps in the quiet relational labour that shapes the pace of a team. On paper, they're one team. In reality, they're operating at four different speeds. No one is wrong, no one is resisting, no one is underperforming. They're simply responding to the conditions they're standing in. But here's the quiet cost. Because everyone is in a different season, everyone is moving at a different pace. And when a team is moving at four different speeds, the organization starts to accelerate. Not because the work demands it, but because the systems and conditions are misaligned. This is what speed looks like in most organizations today. It's not a strategic choice, but survival response to uneven conditions. And when speed becomes a survival response, it stops being a leadership choice. And here's the deeper truth. When leaders move at four different speeds, and this is just an example, the organization inherits all four. Pace becomes fragmented and the fragmentation becomes the environment the new leaders are born into. So here's where the science becomes grounding. And I want to offer it again with clarity and care. When you rush, your brain shifts into pattern matching mode. You default to what you already know. You lose nuance, you lose creativity, you lose perspective. Speed collapses your cognitive field. And this is why rush decisions often feel sort of off in hindsight. You weren't thinking, you were reacting. Also, too, there's a nervous system activation where urgency is physiological. So, rushing is often a stress response. Your body interprets pressure as threat. Your system floods with adrenaline, and you move fast to feel safe. This isn't strategy, this is survival. Your nervous system sets the pace of your leadership. If your body is in urgency, your leadership will be too. Ecological pace, where healthy systems have rhythm, not speed. So in nature, nothing moves at full pace all the time. Ecosystems thrive through cycles. Surge, stabilize, integrate, renew. When a system moves too fast for too long, it becomes brittle. Leaders are no different. A leader without rhythm becomes a leader without rage. And of course, we have a technological acceleration where the environment is moving way faster than the leader. AI can process information instantly. We all know it. But your nervous system cannot, not in the way it does anyway. This mismatch creates a hidden pressure. The environment moves at machine pace where your body moves at a human pace. When leaders try and match the speed of technology, they override their cognitive bandwidth, their emotional regulation, and their ecological rhythm. AI itself, of course, doesn't create urgency. It magnifies the conditions that trigger it. And rhythm becomes the only sustainable counterbalance. Here's the deeper truth, and I want to offer it gently. Speed is often a way of avoiding the discomfort of uncertainty. When you slow down, you feel more, you see more, you notice more, and that can be confronting. But slowing down isn't falling behind. Slowing down is reclaiming your influence because clarity requires space and wisdom requires pace. Inside the ecosystem, speed fractures your external layer, the relational conditions that determine how clearly you think, how steadily you respond, and how effectively you influence. Rhythm restores it because rhythm isn't just personal, it's relational. Your steadiness becomes the system's steadiness, your pace becomes the system's pace, and the pace you choose today becomes the pace others inherit tomorrow. A leader with rhythm becomes the stabilizing force in a system full of different speeds, the regulating node that brings coherence to the whole network, even when every part is moving at its own pace. So, fast is not the opposite of slow. Fast is the opposite of deliberate. Leadership isn't measured in velocity, it's measured in the quality of your decisions and the stability of your influence. A leader with rhythm can accelerate when needed, pause when needed, integrate when needed, renew when needed. This is adaptability in motion, not reacting to the fastest conditions, but leading from the strongest capacity. AI can accelerate the work, but only you can set the pace of your leadership. So, this week's tiny experiment is to choose one decision and slow it down by 20%. Not indefinitely, not dramatically, just enough to think, breathe, and see. Notice what becomes visible when you create even a small amount of space. And for your reflective question, take some time to think or ponder, where am I moving fast to feel in control? And what would become possible if I slow it down? Let it be honest, let it be revealing. For your ecosystem practice, once a day ask, which conditions are driving my pace right now? My own, my team's, my organization's, or the broader environment? Most leaders think they're choosing their pace. This question reveals whether that's actually true. And then once a week, ask, what will become clearer if I led from capacity rather than from the fastest decisions? This is how leaders reclaim their pace, not through control, but through awareness, alignment, and rhythm. Speed is not leadership. Clarity is. Releasing the myth of speed feels like stepping out of a current you didn't realize was carrying you. It's the moment your breath deepens, your thinking widens, and your influence steadies. It feels like returning to yourself, to your rhythm, your clarity, your range. It's spacious, grounded, and quietly powerful, the kind of leadership that moves with intention rather than reacting to the fastest conditions. If myth 6 is a myth of rushing, myth 7 is the myth of power. Because once you stop inheriting the pace of the fastest conditions, you start to see something else with startling clarity. Most leaders aren't inheriting speed, they're inheriting authority structures too. And when your pace is driven by urgency, your influence often shifts with it. From presence to pressure, from clarity to control, from relational influence to positional authority. Our next episode explores the myth of authority, the belief that influence comes from title or role, rather than from the quality of your presence and the stability of your internal ecosystem. It's the third distortion of influence, and it reveals a truth many leaders feel but rarely name. When an ecosystem becomes unstable, authority becomes armor. I'll meet you there.